long before the West had even established anything approaching the ideas of government that we would see today, the Chinese had already established a very effective political system over a very large territory. One of the consequences of that is a tremendous amount of work in the popular arts that was done throughout the centuries in China. A far longer tradition, longer legacy than anything we would see anywhere in the West. And in that, studying Chinese culture is so important because it gives you such an excellent historical contrast with a lot of the ideas that we see in the West. One of the ideas that just stand out to you almost immediately in what you're reading this week is the influence of government, and not government just as kind of this power entity that affects what people are representing, but people within the government actually producing the popular arts. That is something we certainly wouldn't expect to see in the West. We might see funding for the arts, but the idea that the government and those within the government are actually intertwined with producing the popular arts, and not inherently as propaganda, just the production of popular arts itself, is an important contrast in and of itself. The philosophical traditions of China, you'll read about some of those this week. Some of them, of course, Confucianism and so on, are centuries older, strongly influence a lot of the ideas that you see in Chinese art. And specifically, again, as we talked about with Japan too, how is painting viewed differently? In this case, the relationship between text and image that you also saw to an extent in Japan as well. How does that compare and contrast with what we saw in the West? There's clearly a lot of differences that exist. Specific Chinese cultural values about structure and bureaucracy, and since China, depending on how you look at it, has the oldest functioning bureaucracy in the world, that, needless to say, has an effect on how people look at the role of government and society itself. The film that you're watching this week and you're writing the paper on is really a commentary on that. It is saying something about the communist power structure that exists now, but really I would say what the movie is getting at is this long-standing relationship between levels of government and the people who are governed by them. So I would try to think about it in that context. But veneration of your elders is another concept very strong in Chinese history. You do see that in the film too. But you'll see that in representational styles as well. So it comes through more in Kurosawa's dreams in perhaps a more obvious sense, given the whole nuclear blast, which certainly speaks to modern technology. But in the story of Kichu that you're watching, you will also see a lot of examples of how Westernization is affecting Chinese culture, how it's impacting. And that's something I really want you to think about as you're writing the papers. As Kichu travels from place to place, the larger the place she gets, the more you tend to see examples of Western culture, not the least of which would be Arnold Schwarzenegger on the wall in the one scene, if you noticed. So, again, think about these tensions as they exist. And again, we've already kind of gotten the hang of that from Kurosawa's dreams as well, which reflects on really this status of Chinese culture. This movie was made in the late 20th century, but I would say its basic ideas certainly extend into the 21st. But this clash between traditional Chinese cultural values and Western values, which certainly, just in a couple of the things I mentioned just in this brief snippet, are often very different. So think about how those kind of philosophical and political roots of Chinese culture are being challenged by Westernization, and the balance that's sought between this kind of traditional peasant life and the more modern urban lives as well. So for the paper, again, of course the topic is up. Think about, again, also, and I don't want to spoil the movie if you haven't watched it yet, think about what the end means too. You probably don't see that coming, but again, I think that kind of furthers this commentary on Chinese life in the period. So kind of think about how that interplays as well, and that may be a good idea to add into the paper as well. Again, if you have problems putting it together, just let me know, and good luck.